Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and this is the Deansy Boy Show. And welcome to a special edition of the Deansy Boy Show as we go through the stories of Barry Town supporters, players, etc., etc. And, well, thank you for listening to this, if you are listening at this moment, because we got here a very special guest who's going to be talking to us about his days as being a supporter of Barry Town Football Club, and also he is a member of the Plaid Cymru, and he is sitting right next to me now, and it's none other than Ian Johnson. Cheers, Ian. Thanks for doing this interview with us.
Oh, thanks for inviting me along. It's, hopefully we'll have a good chat the next hour or so.
Oh yeah, a bit of introduction of mine. Cheers, thank you very much. But now with this series, it's all going to be about Barry Town United, and I'm going to be interviewing supporters, players, managers, etc. And the reason why I asked you is because you're not only just a supporter, you're a political figure as well in the community of Barry, and also you do stand up for Barry Town. So I thought you'd be the best person to ask. But let's get to the chase. It was all about Barry Town. So how did it all started with you being a Barry Town fan?
Well, I mean, my father obviously is a big football fan. I actually come from a big football family, and between us, everybody in the family, the family come from Merthyr originally, but everybody supports different clubs, which is quite funny. So my grandfather, we used to go and watch Merthyr. My dad was a big Cardiff City fan back in the 60s and 70s. He used to sort of travel away to watch Cardiff City in the Cup Winners' Cup. My uncles, Robin and Chris, they'd go and watch Wales play away. Back in the day before people travelled to watch football internationally. So everybody in the family has supports somebody. Now my dad moved to Barry to marry my mum in the mid 70s. I was born
disaster or something.
he moved to Barry. That's it. Yeah. I suppose because my dad's interest in football, it's always been there. That's something in sort of in the family. So actually, the first football game I ever got taken to was when I was 10 weeks old, and my parents went off to watch Cardiff City on a pre-season tour of Denmark. Oh. Not many people do that when they're 10 weeks old. My dad's also a big Celtic fan. He was the secretary of the Celtic Supporters Club in South Wales for many years, from the early 80s onwards, and so it's perfectly natural to be taken along. When you're able to walk and able to be taken out on Saturday afternoon, the first thing you do is taking people to the local football club. I see my friends these days in Barry doing the same thing. You can see them with their toddlers, sort of on a Saturday afternoon watching the game, and that's really what happened to me. So, the first game that I went to, first Barry Town game at Jenner Park I went to, was I think an FA Cup qualifier against a team called Porto Rovers. Now, I couldn't find Porto on a map these days if you tell me where they are, but I know we drew 2-2 in that game, and I think we won the replay at their place, and we did a bit of a cup run that year. So that was the sort of the early 80s, 84, 85 maybe.
We had a bit of a cup run though, like during the 70s and 80s.
This was the year after we played Reading, I think. I'm trying to do this from memory, because we played, we knocked Merthyr out in the fourth qualifying round, then we played Reading. I think that was 83, 84, and this is the year later.
Yeah.
Or maybe 2 years later, or whatever, it's not important. And then obviously, after that, there were lots of big games, sort of as I was growing up. We got to the Welsh Cup semi-final, we were playing your Swanseas or your Wrexhams, and, I'm not quite sure I bunked off school to come and watch some of those games, but those matches were being played mid-afternoon, and I'm fairly sure most of the schools in Barry were pretty quiet because all the kids were down watching the games.
Well, you also I heard you went to Barry Comprehensive School, and I myself, I'm a Barry Boys student. People with me probably not. Oh yeah, wait a minute, woman, the guy's holding the camera, he's a Barry Boy, but I'm sure they understand you supporting local clubs and etc. So your first game was at the FA Cup. So jumping ahead now, you said you've been supporting Barry Town. What was it like though? What was the atmosphere like back then?
The ground was a bit different. Where we now have the main stand, it used to be this. There were no seats back when I was a kid in there. It was a corrugated, tin roof, and you'd make noise by hitting sort of the back of the stand, things like that. There was where the Jenner rooms are now. There was a little there were benches by there, so you could that was the posh bit of the ground. Yeah. Then it was, I suppose, the early 90s. They built what's now the main stand. That was I think 1990, 91, and then it was a couple of years later in the mid to late 90s where the where the new stand, on the eastern side was built. I think the big thing was, and we had it's I mean, the atmosphere at Barrytown matches has changed over the years. I mean, I'll be honest. When I was there as a youngster, there wasn't really much singing. There were people of different ages, but the atmosphere was different, and I think that's something that's grown and developed and changed, sort of over the years at Jenner Park. I mean. And if you're looking at sort of some of the major things that happened, sort of for the club, obviously I think one of the biggest things was winning the Welsh Cup in 1994.
That was against Cardiff City as well.
When we beat Cardiff City 2-1 at 2-1 at the National Stadium, and that came on the back of beating Cwmbran, beating I think it was Flint, beating Bangor, sort of to get there, and that was our first experience in Europe. But a lot of some of the songs that people still sing, they actually date from sort of the next time round we got into Europe, which is sort of 96, 97, where there was a hardcore of people going to home matches, going to away games, going to North Wales every Saturday, or every other Saturday certainly, and that was where a lot of the atmosphere comes from. And a lot of the songs that people still sing come from from that era of sort of when there was a supporters club bus. It was a fiver anywhere in Wales, so we got a great deal that season. So we had a bus with 70 people every week going to Carnarvon, going to Bangor, going to Rhyl. Sort of during the mid-90s, the time when the club went professional, and that was a great time to be a Barrytown fan, because it was, you'd enjoy yourself. You go to away again, and you come back, go and sit in the clubhouse at Jenner Park, and if you really want to enjoy it, then you could carry on the rest of the night as well.
Like you say, we're going back to the 1990s now, going into the mid 1990s. We've had problems back then with the English League. Is that right? We had a bit of a... Because me, I've only been a Barrytown fan for a few years, and then this is why I asked Barrytown supporters to tell their stories. I've heard stories that we went in the English League, the Southern League, that is, and we got kicked out. Is that right? Or what's the story behind that?
It's not quite right. What happened? I mean, there's been several different things took place over different eras, and people have different viewpoints on it. I was a teenager at the time, so I'm probably not always the best person to ask on the detail of it. In the early Barry played in the Southern League until the very early 1980s. There was then a discussion about having a Welsh League, which became so we came back to play in the Welsh system in what was called the Abacus Welsh League National Division, although it didn't really go any further north than Aberystwyth, so it never really became national. We won that hands down every year. 6 years out of 7 we won it. And then the decision was made to go back and rejoin the Southern League again, which at that time was called Visa Homes League. We played there for a couple of years. There was then a big discussion that took place about the formation of the League of Wales, sort of proper, genuine national Welsh league. And Barrytown were one of the clubs that said, well, actually, partly because of the experience of going back and winning the national division so often, Barrytown was one of the clubs that said, well, we're not really interested in this right now. There was a long, protracted debate went on. The league started with 20 clubs, Barry and several others. I mean, there were 8 clubs originally who were protesting this decision to enforce that they played in Wales. Of those, Merthyr were allowed to continue playing in the conference. Bangor and Newtown decided to join the League of Wales. Rhyl ended up playing a division below the League of Wales. So, whereas then 4 clubs, Barry, Carnarvon, Colwyn Bay and Newport, AFC, or AFC Newport as they were at the time, decided to go and play their games in England. We played our games in Worcester for a season. That was 1992-93. And I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't go to Worcester. I had particularly interested in travelling 90 miles,
especially with many problems as well, like you can't always afford to go to like a home match even though you're playing in Worcester. So
well, I think I was 13 at the time, so it didn't really work out for me. But after a year of that, Neil O'Halloran, who was the chairman at the time, decided that this wasn't a good use of the club's resources, and Barry and both Barry and Carnarvon after a year or two decided to come back to the Welsh system. So we played in the sort of in the Welsh League Division 1, so the same division that we're in now. And that season, that's the year that we beat Cardiff City in the Welsh Cup final. We also won sort of the League Cup. We won There were five trophies that we planted for that season. We won 4 of them, and the other one they just gave up on because we were playing 3 times a week, sort of in April. So so they just never played that. I'm not sure if they've played it since either.
Well, now with the Barry Town and the Cardiff City match, when you beat Cardiff 2-1 to win the Welsh Cup, that was the sort of time where it all began for Barry to go to rise above the reputation and became a household name, because then it was then that Barry qualified for the European Cup Winners' Cup. Was it still on there? Yeah, Cup Winners' Cup, and then it just sort of went further then into the European days. Do you think that was then? It was the time where Barry just went, okay, we're going to Europe playing against Vilnius, and so it was going ahead from there. Do you think that was then when everything went?
The team that won the game against Cardiff City, they were known as Dad's Army. It was an awful lot of players reaching the end of their career. Players, including people like Alan Curtis, for example. People who had, Andy Beattie was managing. Terry Boyle was there. The saying was, the first 10 yards are in your head. They were a team that came together at the right time, and David Huff and Didoria scored those crucial goals. The place went wild, etc., etc. That wasn't the kick on though. The Vilnius, playing the Cup Winners' Cup was important. The trip itself was important because we ended up with a fanzine which I did a few years later called 38 Hours from Vilnius, because that's the length of time on the bus back from Vilnius to Barry.
38 hours.
38 hours non-stop. Well, apart from getting on and off a ferry, go for a walkabout, but that was it. So we actually ran that bus. We joke about it, but it cost us £70 each. Plus, then we got 3 nights hotel for £18. So it was for about £90. We ran a busload of people to Eastern Europe and back for a week. We had Interpol following us. We were the first club from Britain to be playing in Lithuania, to be playing behind not just the Iron Curtain between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, but the first one to be playing in the former Soviet. You're one of the first to be playing in the former Soviet Union. So this was a very, and to go with a load of fans was a very strange experience.
Sleeping on the coach as well, I bet. Sleeping on the floor and on the seats.
Sleeping on the coach was perfectly normal. That was how we did it. The beer there was 12p a pint. If you can't see this, Reese has just gone, wow.
It is
12p a pint. We went to, they also, rather awkwardly, we turned up at the ground and they had a big Union Jack flying instead of a Welsh Dragon, so there's a bit of a diplomatic incident where we had to explain that they got the wrong flag, so they ended up with using one of the fans' flags to put up on the flagpole. Unfortunately, the game didn't quite go right. We got beat 6-0, a bit awkward. But it was a great experience for everybody being involved in it. On the football side of it, though, we actually had a fairly poor season after that. That 94-95 season was not good, and we finished, I think, 7th in the league at the end. We went through a handful of managers, including Eddie May. We had a lot of turnover of players that season. We didn't really get settled. We hadn't really got ourselves into the League of Wales. And the decision was made by Neil O'Halloran in that following summer 1995, that the club should go professional. So we would actually be paying players to play for Barry Town. Neil, of course, sadly died in September of that year, only a couple of weeks in. We'd had a mixed start to the season. And in fact, Eddie May, who'd started the season as manager, left within a month after we got thumped 5-1 at Flint. So he was brand new professional side, and 3 or 4 games in, they were getting beaten 5-1. Which you imagine the atmosphere on the team bus going back from that. Must have been fairly awful. But after that, Paul Giles took over. We went 43 matches unbeaten. Won the league. And then we went into, even though we'd won the league at that time, but winning the league you didn't get into the Champions League. They made us go into the UEFA Cup, and that was obviously a great summer for us, summer 96, so 20 years ago this year. So first of all we played Dienaburg from Latvia, so the fans again went off on their bus across. They stayed in Vilnius again. They went to see Newtown play as well, because Newtown were playing in against Skonto Riga the day before our game. We won away in Dienaburg. We won 2-1 in that match. That was I sadly couldn't make it. I was at a music festival. I was actually, I think. Well, I was 17.
You gotta love your music though. So
Gotta love your music. I saw David Bowie, I think, actually. Yeah, I'm a prodigy. Anyway, but we won 2-1. Sort of away from home, having drawn 0-0 at home. That took us through into the next qualifying round. We played a team called Budapest Lasutas. We went to got the bus out and sort of went off to Budapest. That was great experience again. We lost 3-1 out there. We pulled it back, won 3-1 at home, and then we went through on penalties. That was, for many people, probably sort of one of the best experiences. Was watching us sort of win that game, and then from there we went on and we played Aberdeen, and
the infamous Aberdeen matches.
The infamous Aberdeen matches. Yeah. So again, on the bus up to Aberdeen. And in the match there was we were there on sort of on the side next to the home fans. In the Scottish press, Aberdeen's players were talking up double figures against us. They were going to hammer us. This was going to be a walkover. They were trying to get people to come along to watch lots of goals. They scored in the first couple of minutes, and suddenly we all went, this could go seriously wrong, couldn't it? And then brilliantly, the ball bounced. Richard Jones volleyed at home. There's this great moment that you catch on TV where as he explains it, he tried to pull the shirt over his head, sort of to celebrate, but it was too tight, so it only just went over his face, and then had to let it come back down as he ran towards the fans, and it was just a fantastic atmosphere. And then back home, obviously we put we were allowed some temporary seats in the grounds behind both goals. So now for the first time, this is the first year we had the new stand. So you had the old stand, which is only 6 years older than the new stand. So it doesn't really make sense to call them old and new anymore, but that's still in my head. Then you had these temporary seats behind the goals, and it absolutely belted down on the night. It rained and it rained and it rained. So there were 6,500 in the ground, including about 660 odd Aberdeen fans, and
sorry to stop you, but. I've always had to ask this question to loads of Barry Town fans. With the away fans coming to Jenner Park, was you mixed or was you just separate? Like there would be the Aberdeen section there, and all the Barry Towns would be here, and there. Did you have that, or was it all mixed together?
Well, it's a bit of a story about that because there was segregation, obviously, because you had hundreds. But what's Aberdeen had behind the goal, closest to the gate that we use for home matches on Gladstone Road, those turnstiles there, that was for the Aberdeen fans. So they had the section, the seats, temporary seats closest to that turnstile. The Barry Town fans came in through the gates that are onto Devon Avenue.
Yeah.
Now it absolutely hammered down, and there was no roof on there, so those people sat in those temporary seats got absolutely soaked. But within 4 minutes, everyone was on their feet celebrating because Davo Gorman had put the ball in the net. I think it might be Gorman. I probably got that confused. But but we scored up to 4 minutes. The place went nuts because we only had to score one more goal, and we'd be in a position to qualify. The funny story about the seating, though, is that there were actually 666 seats in the Aberdeen end. And Aberdeen sent us one ticket back saying they thought 666 was unlucky.
666, just remember that, people. 666.
But the game went on. Obviously, in the end, we drew 3-3. I still maintain their last goal was offside, and we should have won that. But that's life. We then went on, had a great season. 96-97 was a brilliant season again. We beat Cwmbran to win the cup. We won the league. If I'm remembering the season right, we also beat Bangor at Aberystwyth on penalties in the League Cup. That was a great day, and that then led us on to sort of 2 seasons where we played Dynamo Kiev. We kept on winning the league. Gary Barnett was the manager at this point. The fans had renamed themselves the Barney Army, so not
Gary Barnett, Barney Army,
Army, not Barney. Barney, yeah. So we had a load of t-shirts with Barney Rubble on them, things like that. Avion Williams was signed from Carnarvon. One of the big days, I think, for the club, and I'm speaking now ahead of the TNS game. It was the first time that we were live on telly at Jenner Park. Was when we played Carnarvon, and there were 2,700 people in the ground that day. It was the new record for the Welsh Premier for the people in the ground. It was a great atmosphere, singing all game, and Avion actually scored for Carnarvon that day against us. We went 1-0 down to 90 seconds, and Avion scored for them in injury time, and between them we scored 5 goals because we were great that day. But that's how it goes. And then it sort of just snowballs. We had several years where we were, everything we touched as a turned to gold. Yeah. Won the league. Won the cups. Gary Barnett left. Richard Jones took over for a year. Didn't win the league that year. We then had Peter Nicholas take over in 2000. Yeah. We played Boa Vista. We were live on Eurosport, losing 2-0 away at Boa Vista. Year later, having won the league, we then played Porto after we knocked out Shamkir from Azerbaijan. First of all, we played Porto. Porto trip again, great. This was still an era where we took buses to to games. So the fans went over there. It was a great experience. There were, I think, 43,000, at the game in Porto, Stadio de Dragão.
Over 45,000, something like that. Well, yeah, it was something like that.
It was more there to watch Barry Town than in that year to watch Liverpool, Celtic, or Man United, if I remember it right. So more people came to watch us. Yeah. Of course, they did see Porto beat us 8-0, so maybe they got value for money out of it. But I mean, Deco scored 4 goals that night.
Yeah, I was going to say about Deco then. When Deco, Portuguese legend, he was playing as well, wasn't he?
What can you say when Deco scores 4? There's not much you can do. Yeah. But what we did do, and funnily enough, it's ironic because the side that in the return game a week later. Porto put out a side which people sort of call a bit of a scratch side. Oh yeah, they're not really bringing the big names, are they? Actually, they did. I mean, we had this was a Barrytown beat Porto 3-1 at Jenner Park that night, and that Porto side included Ovchinnikov in goal, who had 60-odd caps. It included Jorge Costa, who was a Portuguese international right back, finished the season playing at Charlton in the Premiership at the time. It was Ricardo Carvalho's debut, I believe, for Porto. We all know what happened to him afterwards. Helder Postigo later scored against England in the European Championships. He was playing that. He came as a substitute that day and got booked for a foul on Andrew York. Hugo Ibarra was £2.5 million signing from Boca Juniors, made his Porto debut that day. He ended up actually playing against Porto for Monaco in the Champions League final a couple of years later. They were ironically, when Porto went on to win the Champions League final a couple of years later, there were more players who played in the game where they got beat by Barry than where they beat Barry. So it's a funny world.
After that game, after we beat them 3-1, just quickly tell us the 3 players that scored for us in that 3-1 win.
You put me on the spot now. Gary Lloyd scored a penalty. Andrew York score?
I know John French did. John French did. I think it was I thought Jamie Morley. Was it Jamie Morley or?
I can't remember. He scored top of my head right now.
It could have been Andrew York or Jamie Morley.
Maybe I'm thinking of the Shamkir game. I'm not sure.
But as Barrytown fans, we got loads of history. So please don't judge us if we forget a specific player who scored against Porto. But
who scored in a game 15 years ago?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
I'll try and remember it.
But after the Porto game, didn't Jose Mourinho took over from Porto, or was it just a season or 2 seasons after?
About 4 weeks later, they sacked their manager. He left the ground with us singing "There's only one Boa Vista" at them. They weren't happy. They didn't stay for tea afterwards. They went straight off to Roost, get their flight home. They weren't happy at us being beat by us. So a couple of weeks later, Mourinho took charge. So you could say that Barry beating Porto is what gave Jose Mourinho his big shot at management. Who knows? The club went on. It's in that sense that was sort of maybe some of the one of the high points. The next 2 years were a bit harder for us. Paulo Halloran had been sort of in charge of the club. Sold the club to a businessman called Kevin Green. there was a lot of issues about sort of about the finances of the club that started coming to the fore. And we actually performed phenomenally well for the next 2 seasons. Kenny Brown took over as manager from Nico. Obviously, Nico at the time was pretty much the guy who'd had most outfield caps for Wales. Back in the days when you didn't have so many internationals. But Nico went off to Swansea, joining Colin Addison down there. So Kenny Brown took over. We won. We did the double treble. We won the league, we won the cup, we won the League Cup. There's some quite fantastic scenes and events. Especially I think probably the winning the Welsh Cup against Cwmbran down at Llanelli at Stevenage Park. There were hundreds of Barry fans sort of down there enjoying that, and it was particularly emotional as a final against Cwmbran because Tony Wilcox had recently died, and Tony had been both Barry Town and Cwmbran manager. Barry manager in the 80s when we'd been very successful, and Cwmbran manager winning the League of Wales with them. So that was quite a it was an emotional final. There was also really the last few matches of the 2002-2003 season were basically we were I'll throw the phrase perhaps hunting down TNS. It's appeared a long time out that actually TNS were going to win the league that year, and what happened was that as the matches went on, we just had a juggernaut going on. The last game we lost in the league that season was in December at Aberystwyth, and so we didn't lose after that from then until the end of April. And so we got to the last couple of weeks, and I think probably the most important day was against Avon-Lido at home, and it was 0-0. It was great atmosphere in the ground, but we got to the 94th minute, we hadn't scored, it was 0-0, and then Gary Lloyd scored direct from a corner. And the place just went ballistic, as you can imagine.
Thank you very much, Gary Lloyd, for that. But it was like you saying, you're going from the 2000-2003 seasons, but then 2003 and 2004 season, I think it was from 2003 to 2004. You had your very last Champions League match against Macedonia's side. What was it? Vardar Skopje, and. But then it all seemed to go, well, all the glory seemed to fade away after that, didn't it? Because after the Skopje match, that was when financial difficulties started to come into play then. And then all of a sudden a dark cloud hovered over Jenner Park. So if you want to tell us about the Skopje match, that'll be great. But also what happened afterwards with the financial difficulties and that.
Well, the Vardar Skopje game was the last matches in Europe so far.
Yeah, so far we're still hoping.
We'll win the Welsh Cup at some point. Yeah. But seriously, that was the last game so far, and that was summer 2003. And ironically, there's a little bit of a sort of a counterfactual going on. I went over to Macedonia. I watched the game. I was one of the fans who went over. It was fun. A lot of people didn't go because they thought we were going. They wanted to save their money from going to Moscow a few weeks later because that was who we were going to play in the next round. Unfortunately, we went to Skopje. We lost 3-0 to Vardar over there at home. We scored in the first minute. Lee Jarman scored, so that put us back in the game. So we were all convinced we were going to beat them at least 3-0 at home. But we only ended up winning 2-1, so we went out 4-2 on aggregate. The ironic sort of counterfactual, so where something. If something else had happened, then what might have changed is that we went on that fantastic run at the end of 2002-2003 season to win the league, and we played Vardar Skopje of Macedonia. Whereas TNS, who came second after leading almost all season, played Man City and won the first match. It was the first match at their new stadium, which had previously been used for the Commonwealth Games. And you can only wonder maybe if Barry's financial situation might have been different if we'd been playing Man City with thousands of people coming to a game in Cardiff rather than playing against Vardar Skopje of Macedonia. I don't know. So what happened then was really an issue of cash flow for the club. So the administrators were called in, the players were released because there simply wasn't enough money coming through to pay them. There was the court gave us 3 months, or gave the administrators 3 months to work out what to do with the club, whether to sell the club, so to make it a viable financial organisation, or to actually just scrap the club, just fold it totally. So the most important meeting was one on the 10th of December. and that took place in the general rooms. And what happened there was that the administrator had to make an offer to the creditors. So the creditors being the people who were owed money by the club in various ways. Now some of the club's debts were things that had to be paid immediately. Some of them were longer term. So so when people talk about the debt that Barrytown had, well, a lot of that actually was, like having a mortgage on your house. It's something you're paying off over a long period of time. It's so brewery loans, things like that. But some of it was owed to the to HMRC, so the Inland Revenue, taxes that need to be paid back. Some of it was owed to players, because they hadn't been paid all of the money that they had, and others was owed to to other suppliers. So the decision was, or what the administrator did, we did a 3-month campaign where we were trying to get more people interested. We tried to bring money in to buy the club ourselves, because you're buying the club essentially at a knockdown rate. And one of the people that came in to talk to us was a gentleman called Stuart Lovering, who was someone who had seen the story in the newspaper and thought that he could help out. So because he said, well, I've got the amount of money that you need, which is £125,000 to buy the club out of administration and be able to take the club forward. So that was the decision of the supporters at the time. Was that somebody had come in and said, look, here's the money. There were other finances outstanding that we still be paid, because things like the Premier Cup money or European money from playing in matches in Europe, that was paid to you later on in the season. So if that had been paid up front, then a different story. But because that's paid towards the end of the season, that money was going to come in later. So the creditors decided on the 10th of December 2003 that Stuart Lovering was the person to take over the club.
But that was good for Stuart Lovering. That's ironic to say that about Stuart Lovering. It was good for Lovering to purchase the club, to save it in the last minute, but it did not go that well. There was no light at the end of the tunnel for Barrytown then. It was more like the nightmare had just begun. Do you think so?
I think it's fair to say we hadn't really anticipated what would happen next. I think Stuart Lovering came in and he bought the club, which meant he owned the club. And what Stuart Lovering decided was that what he wanted was what he would do. Unfortunately, there were various incidents which happened over the next couple of years, which weren't beneficial to the club. There was a dispute that was taking place between the club and the Vale of Royal Council, which was already happening. Some of the people who've been involved in the club in the intervening period under the administration were had been discussing with the council about how much was being paid to Jenner Park. We believe the district, I believe, although I've not seen the documents, that the district valuer compared Jenner Park with, for example, grounds like those by Bristol Rovers or Ipswich, and therefore suggested that it was worth about £42,000 to the council every year, which is obviously far beyond the ability of the club to pay at a point where we had no real income coming in. There became an argument started happening with the supporters club. Several key members of the sports club were banned from matches,
including your father as well.
My father, the secretary, the treasurer. My father, who had been to all of the matches, was banned for organising a boycott because, as you probably understand, the team wasn't playing very well. We'd been relegated, and a lot of people didn't want to come along and watch the games. We ended up playing a couple of matches at Port Talbot.
Thank you very much, Port Talbot, for actually, because they're quite friends with us. So we're very close with Port Talbot Town Football Club. So thanks for them for lending us their ground, and thanks for their support to this day. Sorry, we carry on then.
We spent half a season playing more half a season playing at Treforest. There was concern that the club would never come back to Barry. The club was playing with obviously no one being paid at this point. It was decided that sort of another football club should be formed to play to play out of Jenner Park. So that was Barry FC was started by a number of people who've been involved in the sports club. The supporters club itself decided to take its money away from Barry Town and put it into a new club, which was managed by Ashley Griffiths, who was the sort of former Barry Town legend from the 1980s himself. So these were fairly dark years, and those dark years went on for a very long time because it was simply very difficult for many people to do business with the owner of the club. There were a large number of occasions, even when he'd been able to agree terms with the council to move the club back to Jenner Park, it was regularly put up for sale. There were lots of discussions about what he actually wanted to achieve from the club. We slipped down as far as the second division of the Welsh League, which was the lowest point of the club in its in its history. I suspect if you want to look for a turnaround in the club's fortunes, it would be when Gavin Chesterfield took over as manager. Gavin and Hannah obviously have performed probably what's close to miracles, both in working with the previous administration of the club and sort of developing a system which has allowed us to move forward. And I think really if you sort of jump forward a few years and try and block most of that decade from your mind as a football fan. I certainly didn't go to that many matches either at Jenner Park or away from home. I know lots of other people who'd been previously very involved, going to North Wales on a regular basis to watch games, found themselves fairly frustrated. In that time, though, a lot of new people came along, and they put time and effort into making sure that the club continued to exist. And if you talk to sort of club historians like Jeff McInnery or Jason Paulin, then they'll tell you these things are actually quite cyclical. But the problem with football is we all get very emotional about it. So so it's very frustrating when you put time and effort into something, and and then it's not rewarded. And what happened with a lot of people was that they felt that they were running a football club because under the previous before under Kevin Green and that sort of thing, people went and worked in the Jenner rooms. They worked behind the bar. They were part of a community, and that kind of came to an end. So ironically, I think the best thing for the club was when we got to that sort of period in a couple of years ago now in 2013, where Stuart Lovering sort of having been through the process of trying to sell the club to people at different points, decided to put the club, sort of out of business, stop trading, because suddenly he no longer had anything to bargain with. There's no longer anything for him to turn around and say, if you don't follow what I say, then this is what will happen. Because the worst did happen. Barry Town's record that year was expunged. People turned up to watch a match against Tom Pentre and found the club was out of existence now. Yeah.
And it was around about that time as well that I think it was 2012 or 2013. It was just somewhere after we had a very good Welsh Cup run as well, again against the likes of Flint again and Prestatyn in the semi-finals when we went up to Newtown. When I was there, I think you were there as well. I think most of us here were there, and it was a very good day, even though we lost. But it was sort of after that, and we haven't seen the prize money as well. From the FPW, which I'll get on to that in a minute. I'll ask 3 more questions, and one of them is going to be about the FPW, and you can say whatever you want as well. But it was sort of after when, like you said about Lovering, he was going to pull the plug as well, and when he pulled the plug on Barry Town, and that was when all of us started to go into action then. So you want to tell us about that as well, when we went into action as well after we pulled the plug?
Well, that summer, this came a couple of weeks after the end of that Welsh Cup run. Obviously the club was pulled. Now, what should have been common sense would have been what's done usually in these circumstances, which in a club is withdrawn from a league or if it's a financial trouble, then they usually drop 2 divisions. That's the sort of a European standard. And so Barry to having played in Welsh League Division 1, or it would have made sense to have been playing Welsh League Division 3 a year later. Now, what happened in in the court case, when I sat there through the court case, listening to everything, and it was very strange because you listen to these things coming your way, and things from the opposition, and you reach this point where you're never sure what the judge is going to say, and the summing up was a real game of 2 halves, sort of to use the cliche, because my reading of what the judge said was that we were wrong, but that they were wronger. Because our argument was really that, well, we were a continuation of Barry Town in any sense, in a real sense, because we were the fans, we were the players, we were the beating heart of the club.
We
But
were the same as well. We were like just the whole same thing.
well, what the judge's comment was that we weren't, that we were a new organisation, that the club, sort of had died with Stuart Lovering, because that's was it. This is my interpretation of his comments. What he said though was that the FAW had failed to understand their own rules. And that was the important issue, because the FAW's rules allow them to place a club in whatever appropriate part of the pyramid they think so. And what happened was that whereas the committee that had made the suggestion around where the Barry Town should play had been overruled by the full FAW, and the full FAW had not understood, because they'd used a different example. A wrong example, ironically involving Llansanfraid, which is the village where TNS used to play. By not understanding that, they'd got it totally wrong. So the judge said, well, if I were you, I'd go and think about this. Look at the size of this club. Look what this club can achieve. Why would you want them playing local league football when they should be doing something useful for Wales? And really that's what's happened. And I think Barry Town approved that suggestion right in the last couple of years, winning Division 3, winning Division 2. Good season now in Division 1. Fingers crossed against TNS, which is obviously the game this weekend, before when I'm speaking, and fingers crossed for the club in the future, because there's all sorts of other things happening with the academy, with the disability team, with the ladies teams, where you've got sort of a real sort of community feeling, sort of going around the place. Jenner Park's been improved. You have a 3G pitch there now. You have a sort of the clubhouse now being sort of reopened for fans. Hopefully, that'll become have a good community use in future as well. And I think that all bodes, just very well for the club going forward. And I mean, as a fan, I'd love to see us, back in the Welsh Premier on Scorio every week, not just every now and again, and playing in Europe in the future as well. I don't think that's beyond us. We are Wales's largest town. If we got to the Welsh Premier, we'd be the largest town in the Welsh Premier as well. We've got the fans for it. I think we've got the commitment for it, and I think there's a real opportunity for us in the future now.
I feel so too as well. I think we have a great opportunity. As well, we're going to stick to being supporters of Barry Town. 2 more questions, and a little special question here. I get this now a lot from my friends, right? Because my friends are big, would you believe it, Man United fans, Man City, Liverpool fans. And just a question I wanted to ask you, and just taking time, we'll do this very quickly. When you go to your friends, or when you go to some people, and you say, with a passion, I support Barry Town, do you get people coming up to you say, why? They're a crap team. Why don't you support Man United? Do you get that? Or because I get that quite a lot, to be honest with you.
I think it's a bit of a sheeple kind of thing, isn't it? Sort of, I mean, the big Premiership clubs are on the telly. People buy the shirts, but you can't see them live every week. You can't afford to see them live every week. I mean, I'm involved with things locally because I'm interested in them, because I think it has an impact on them locally. And people sort of say, "Oh, who's your team?" Usually, I find people are actually quite interested when I say Barry. Because there's that sort of, oh, well, that's a bit different, isn't it? It's not. It's not Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, Man City. It's not even Cardiff City. It's I support my local team. It's where I'm from. It's where I feel I have an emotional investment. I mean, I live on Gladstone Road, down the road from the ground, so it's a lot easier now to get to matches than it used to be when I was a kid, because my parents live in the west end of the town. So I don't feel that. I mean, if people want to, take the mickey for supporting your local club, well, that's fine. But I go and watch my side. And really that's what it's about, because I go and watch football, and football is meant to be watched live, not on not on the telly.
2 more questions, and this question is going to be about the Barry and TNS game this Saturday. Now, we've got a long rivalry history with TNS. I mean, if you look back on some of the seasons, we've been like the Manchester United of the Welsh Premier League. Well, that's what I like to think. And TNS have been like sort of, let's just say, the Chelsea Football Club of the league, and they've always been head to head with who's going to be first, who's going to be the champions, and that's what I always felt like when I look back on the clubs, even though I wasn't around to where you guys were into Europe and everything. That's why I want to know. What was it like with that rivalry, and what was one of the best games with Barry and TNS then?
Well, I probably think Celtic and Rangers probably more appropriate than Man U and Chelsea. But what's funny is that maybe the League of Wales, the Welsh Premier, really is actually a story of those two clubs. I mean, we won the league 7 years out of 8. TNS have won it almost every year since. Apart from a couple of years where sort of Nettley Bangor have won it. We've won 2/3 of the leagues, and more than 2/3 of those leagues between us. But TNS only actually won one when we were in it, ironically, which is 99-2000, and we lost the last game of the season away at Connors Quay, which meant they won the league. The best game against TNS, well, there's two best games for different reasons. Possibly the best one from our perspective, was when we beat them. They just became known as Total Network Solutions, because previously they'd been Llansan Fried. And this was in, I think it was September 1997. Avian Williams scored 5 goals, and we beat them 10-0, which was announced as being a 10-0 scoreline. Yeah, TNS. Yeah. The best actual match, though, was, in my opinion, was the Welsh Cup final that we lost against them in 1996. This was a game that was drawn 3-3 on the day. 1-0, 1-1, 2-1, 2-2, 3-2, 3-3, and then we lost on penalties when Andy Mullen saved from Die Withers, Barry legend that we shouldn't forget. So that was absolutely phenomenal game. It was just disappointing to lose. And another match that I suppose stands out for everybody was a Premier Cup quarter-final, which had to be abandoned at Jenner Park because of the weather. And at the time, TNS were winning 3-2 when it was abandoned at half-time during extra time because the pitch was unplayable. But all 5 goals had been scored at the same end. So so TNS or people were saying, oh, we were robbed, we was robbed, we'd have beaten Barry, but actually all the goals had been scored at the same end. So who knows, maybe we'd have scored 2 in that that second half of extra time. So, but I mean, all those games with TNS have always been big matches, and hopefully the Welsh Cup game will be as well, and we'll do ourselves proud. Final question: predictions on this Saturday's match. What do you think the score will be? Predictions are a mugs game, aren't they? So I'm not.
But it's always fun.
I'm not going to be taking on. I always finish last in Six Nations, sort of rugby predictions. So I'll be. My head says that TNS would win 2 or 3-0 because they have a habit of grinding out results. I saw them the other week on the telly beating Denby. Sort of in the World Cup final. Obviously, we put a few more than that past Denby, but I really didn't feel TNS got out of second gear in that one there. So I think they've got the professionalism to do a job on us. But it's up to us to really do the giant killing, isn't it? Sort of this is our day. It's our first game on the box in a very long time. Hopefully we'll have a lot of supporters there at the game. We'll have a lot of noise, and we'll be showing people, sort of that we really are the size of a Welsh Premier club, and that's going to be our future as well.
Well, Ian Johnson, thank you for this interview. Very much appreciate it. But for the people who want to know you as a political figure as well, what's your Twitter? Twitter account name?
Well, I wouldn't say I just use my Twitter for politics. I use it for everything. But it's Ian James Johnson, which obviously is my full name. And you just get me talking about whatever, twittering about whatever I feel is interesting at the time, innit?
And being a Plaid Cymru councillor, all the best for you in that side. And thank you very much, Ian Johnson. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, on the and thanks for listening for the Deansy Boy podcast show, the Barrytown United special. And thank you to my guest, Ian Johnson. I will see you soon. Goodbye and up the town.
Thank you.
Oh my God.